Thanks, Bob. Okay, so
I'm the host, so
can you repeat that?
Okay, so the current GitLab.com, what is deployed there is like a primary cell. We're gonna be adding secondary cells. Primary cells serves a special purpose. It's meant to ensure uniqueness across cluster. Over time, we're gonna be removing special status of the primary cell to make it behave as any other cell in a cluster. The functions currently done by the primary cell closer to cells 2.0 gonna be moved into a global service. The primary cell, the special function of the primary cell would be also a user of a global service, the same way as a secondary cells. That's the idea. So technically, architecturally, we are adding cells to the primary cell cluster. That is like we are adding basically cells. We are not migrating data.
Yeah.
We are adding to the existing cluster.
Yeah, and if I got it right, the reason that we're now making a thing like a primary cell that will have this API that we're later going to move into a separate service is a shortcut. So we can deploy so we can start deploying new cells and onboarding customers into their isolated, well, semi-isolated cell without having to implement a new service and deploy that before we can get going.
Correct. And I'm actually thinking about also like the transition period, which is more like a resilience focused. We could introduce a global service that is read-only to ensure that all of the routing information can be done by the global service, but make write changes only on top of the primary cell. So technically, one of the venue that we may actually start implementing after 1.0, which is gonna be like a half step, is to introduce a global service that is serving all read-only data, but is forwarding all writes to the primary cell. So like your resilience then is defined by the you can still do all of the operations. I mean, login, CI, and everything on secondary cells, but you cannot create new projects, groups, users if the primary cell is unavailable. This would be like the failure mode if the primary cell is like completely down. But this is like a half step. The closer we get to the 1.0, and the idea would be that like it's like a dropping replacement. So we put a global service that is like a pass through for writes, but cells read only. And technically, we could very likely run that on top of the runway or anything that would be suitable for us. But think about that. We are exposing this API on the primary cell because it's simply the easier.
Yeah, there's already talks to the databases that know this
exactly
shared state.
But like we very likely before we go GA, we probably gonna add a middleman to increase resiliency.
So if we think about this from an observability perspective, it sounds like the observability that we want on cell 1 is always going to be somewhat special, because if it goes down, when we finally have a network of cells, if it goes down, it's still a single point.
No,
it's a failure.
No. That's what I understood from what Camille just said. In the first iteration, when we deploy cell 1.0, so the first secondary cell, yes, then we will need to monitor the primary cell differently, because it's going to have this API and it's going to serve this API. I think we could already extract that out as a service, because otherwise the traffic for like the traffic that is the requests that secondaries make to the primary are going to drown out and all the other traffic that the cell 1 is serving. But in the future, this hard dependency on cell 1 goes away when we have a global service. This is 2 steps in the future, because the first step is going to be a new service deployed separate from a cell. It is not a cell that is going to read from the database directly, currently the same data in the first three. Yeah, first the same database as cell 1 is currently reading from, and it's going to write by calling the API of the primary cell. This is the first step, but later this tie will be cut completely, and then each
Global
cell.
service. I see. Does that service have a proposed name at the moment?
In the docs, it was named cluster-wide data provider, but probably we just gonna rename it to the global service, or like a cluster service, whatever. One of these two names. It should be very simple. So we have like naming. We have primary cell, secondary cell. So probably global service would fit very well, but there is also a service.
I wouldn't call it a cell.
Yeah.
Sorry?
I wouldn't call it a cell if we can avoid that. The separate service. Global service sounds better than, yeah.
And I like having the name of cluster in there because global immediately makes me think of global search.
Naming is hard.
Naming is hard.
Like we don't have that.
Having the name that we can talk about it today is helpful, but okay, so bringing this back to what we need from, I know that we also need to do readiness, but I think trying to focus the conversation on just the observability side. I know it's helpful to know what the long-term jumps are, like what we need to get to in the end. And I want to try and build as much as we can with that end in mind, but also trying to just deliver cell 1. So what do we actually
Camille, I have another question in terms of observability. Is every cell going to be the same? Sorry, is every cell going to have the same shape? Like now we were talking about two reference architectures, the 10K one and the 3K one in one of those issues. They are slightly different. For example, one has two redises and the other has only one.
No idea.
I'm going to say no.
I cannot answer you that question. Sorry.
I'm going to assume that the answer is no, because I expect that we will have to provision each cell based on the requirements that come for that cell. I imagine that it's going to be a case of when we first provision a cell, we automatically go with the 15K, for example. And then as we get certain kinds of customers on there, we might find a customer that places really heavy demands on Redis. So we need more Redis. Or we have a customer that has a much higher demands on runner on this cell than others. So we give it more runner capability. And I think that over time, the cells will evolve to be different from whatever the reference base was.
Bob, I think the question is, I think it's not about the sizing. I think it's about what are your expectations about how these cells should be, I guess, what type of the resources they should have as a baseline.
Yes, but also what we need to monitor as a baseline. Like, do we need to monitor two separate redises or do we need to monitor just one inside a cell?
I have no idea. So far we've been kind of looking at the reference architectures because it's our like a reference guide. So for the QA, we would probably start with the smallest cell possible, like a 3K.
Yes.
Looking at our top customers, it seems that we are rather on setting up small cells rather than large, setting many.
Yeah, I agree.
Instead of one large. I don't really anticipate us setting a cell size of that is 1/10 of the GitLab.com current. It just doesn't make sense. I would rather expect us to have 100 sizes.
Okay.
Them.
That means
what you need, Bob.
That means that we can stay closer to dedicated, and we already have a bunch of the stuff that we can steal from dedicated this way, because those cells are also not. They are not 15K reference architectures, if I remember correctly. So the shape is the same, and then if we ever need a bigger cell, we will expand that.
I would be not surprised that there's gonna be a requirement very soon, and it's something that Jörg also raised about moving ourselves onto a cell. So I don't know what would be the sizing for ourselves.
Did you say moving ourselves onto a cell?
Yes. So I don't know what would be the size of that cell. that we would require to run ourselves, including all of the CI pipelines that we are pushing, because I think this is the main feature that is consuming most of the compute.
Yeah, but that's a different question. Are runners going to be shared? Like our shared runners, are they going? No, separate.
No.
Every cell has their own shared runners.
Yes. So like from the architectural point of view, everything is isolated except GitLab pages because of the domain.
Yeah.
But everything else is isolated. But the GitLab pages isolation, it's also, I think, a question mark.
Yes, I had a question about that later. But we don't want customers to know, so that's kind of a no-go. But if we didn't have to share domain, then we could have it separate. But I don't think that's part of Cells 1.0, or is it?
It's not even about the sharing domain or not, because technically we could all route even like a pages to many pages domains if we would really want to. It's just the question about the cost. So technically, that's not really an issue, like to running many concurrent GitLab pages and route based on the custom domain. Because like the routing service that we are working on, it's flexible to make routing decision on anything. It could be
awesome.
it could be like a pages domain. So technically, we could have each dedicated could have its own pages domain. Pages. The question is about the custom domains and the TLS certificates, but maybe we could serve them slightly differently. And that's it. Really, like we could route GitHub.io easily to many pages if you would really want to as well.
Okay, that's good to know. For the first iteration of the readiness review, do we need to cover? Is there anything not included in Cells 1.0? Like there were still some questions open when I last read the document, for example, regarding pages.
I don't know about the pages, but probably for 1.0 we say that pages it's gonna be not supported feature, at least initially, just because of the simplicity. So I'm kind of thinking if this is like the area of just where we can cut the scope.
Yeah, I agree. Rachel, is it okay for us to extend, like do multiple readiness reviews? We start with this one for Cells 1.0 and the services that are going to be supported there and the workflows that are supported there. For example, if I read correctly, Cells 1.0 is only going to serve private projects and there's no switching organizations and so on.
Oh yeah, no, so what I'm concentrating on is only what we need for Cells 1.0 at the moment. I think if we do need to eventually expand that to what we need for Cells N, but right now it's just what we need to do for Cell 1.0. So I think having a cut down, having the readiness review just for 1.0 is exactly what I have in mind.
Okay, so then of all the things that we have listed here for questions in this readiness section in the document.
So the question I have is the existing readiness review that we have going to work for this? Because the readiness review that we have right now is focused very much on adding something, like it's adding a service or adding a feature. This is like a whole nother one.
I don't think it is. If I understand correctly, I don't know who is going to do this, but we're going to deploy a cell that is not going to do anything at first. And it might be accessible from the outside through a URL, but people don't need to know that. Like it could be us0.gitlab.com, and then you access this cell. Then later we're going to add the routing service on top of that.
So I
Camille, please interrupt if I'm wrong.
I'm kind of thinking that we should do readiness review on components introduced. So we're gonna have to slap routing service on top of gitlab.com somehow. I think we should focus per component being deployed. So if we're gonna add routing service, this is something that goes first from the readiness review, because it's like a new component. And we're gonna do it even on top of like just the current primary cell only, that it's gonna be adding new entity into a stack that is gonna be pretty much pass through. That is, we're gonna have to start deploying that and like maintaining.
Yeah.
So can you
So,
give an example of what you mean by component?
sorry, can you say again?
You say like a readiness review for each component introduced. So when you say component, just what level are you talking at there?
I'm talking here specifically about routing service.
So
We're
the
gonna.
readiness, do you already know what component, like routing service is the first one? And I think that's I hadn't thought about that, but that's a great suggestion to do that first, because then we can optimize that, see if it doesn't add too much latency or whatever. So, but do you have an idea on how we're going to separate the next components?
They're basically gonna be like routing service and secondary cell being added to the stack. There's basically like two components, but in order to attach, I think the question is about like how you attach secondary cell to a cluster, which is like you have to attach that to the routing and you have to attach that to the primary cell. So the question is about the order, but technically I think in all cases it's about like we need to have. I agree with you that we don't need routing service just to attach a secondary cell, but these are like two separate objectives to achieve like the common goal serving. There's gonna be also attaching to the SSHD.
Yeah.
So technically, I
That's the
think
SHD router that you were discussing on Slack with
that,
Igor.
it's not really a router. It's more like an extension to the GitLab SSHD to be cell aware. Which is, I think, also like we're gonna have routing service, we're gonna have change to the GitLab SSHD, how it's implemented. I think it also should go through acceptance criteria. We're gonna have change to the primary cell introducing cell awareness. I think it also should go through acceptance criteria, because when you expose a primary cell, you're gonna also allocate IDs, which is like do we not run out of the IDs on the primary database and things like that. So I think for every milestone, we should have like a readiness review and acceptance criteria. And like we could order them how we fit. Because we don't need routing service, we don't need SSH initially, because you can access them by domain specifically. I mean the secondary cell that is just attached. But we're gonna have at least, I think, 4 major milestones, like a change on the gitlab.com HTTP routing, a change on the gitlab.com SSH routing, extension of the primary cell with the API and cell awareness, addition of the secondary cell to primary cell, where secondary cell is actually gonna start claiming things on the primary cell. And this is also the moment when we actually have to, I think, when you make primary cell aware, this is when we need to start monitoring more stuff and being aware about some failure modes. When you start attaching secondary cell, I think you need to start monitoring secondary cell and its impact on the primary cell and the latency.
The secondary cell to the primary cell, that's no longer cells 1.0. That's the next step in the project.
No, that's
1.0.
Yeah, that's 1.0.
Okay. So you said that there's four pieces attached to HTTP routing, attached to SSH routing, extension of primary cell, and addition of the secondary cell to the primary cell. Shouldn't check
I think this is at least that. That's the bare minimum, I think, of the major infrastructure changes that we're gonna be doing.
So are we saying that each of those is going to be a readiness review?
I'm pretty much sure, because they are touching different bases.
Yes, I agree. And all of them can be kind of done in isolation. They will only make sense when there is a secondary cell, but I mean, you can, as you mentioned, deploy the routing services if they and have them route only to one cell.
So thinking through just the first one, attached to HTTP routing, who actually does that work to do it? Who writes up the review? And then I'm assuming we review it with them.
Tenants are gonna be writing routing service as a Cloudflare worker. This is what we're gonna be doing. Who is gonna be reviewing and deploying? That's I think the open question to me yet.
The deploying is a very good point, because I don't know anything about that, and we need somebody. Like, all of this work is going to be much easier if we have a secondary cell deployed in pre or whatever, so we can start like see how we want to look at these things. So who is going to help us deploy stuff?
Delivery is going to help us deploy stuff, apparently.
Excellent. Excellent. So then I think the readiness reviews could be tenant scale, us, and delivery, because then we have SREs on both sides and the people who built it.
I think like from the routing service, we have to decide steps of writing the service, like from the smallest deployed to actual what we want to do, achieve. Because it's also about like proper testing and getting familiar with the deployment and how to not break GitLab.com domain. It's really scary when I think about that. We're gonna put some.
Yeah, we're going to put something in front of every request on GitLab.com. Well.
So I'm kind of thinking that what I would really like to do, I initially just deploy something that just does pass through only, that we get some metrics out of it, ensure that it works stable, and only then start extending that with the functionality.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
When we deploy something that is pass-through valid, we could then build in that service some percentage rollout, because Cloudflare has actually trouble with the percentage rollout as a feature. They don't have, I think, something like that.
Yeah, and if you build pass-through, then we could build it inside the Cloudflare worker somehow to percentage-wise say, okay, this many requests will do a thing, and the others will just have the old pass-through that we've already.
Or just like, if you inject a header, this is only when it's gonna go through like the proper routing, otherwise it's gonna go pass through.
Yeah.
So we need to figure out a way to safely deploy and validate it at scale from something that does nothing to something that does something.
Yeah, and this is I think somebody will, Rachel, this is a question for you. Somebody is going to have to help with the tenant scale team there to get that deployed. It doesn't fit on Runway, and I don't think we need to build something reusable. It's not often that we put something in front of all GitLab.com. So
no, this feels like it's a special once-off thing. I should hope we weren't going to do this every other week. So I'm just thinking about how there's two aspects of the conversation that we're having now. The one is much more like on the technical side, like this is what the thing is going to do and this is how it's going to work. And then I'm focusing on the side of how does that become a project? Like how do these four, just for example, how do these four things, are they going to be milestones? Are they delivery points for each of the piece? And I'm thinking what might be more effective is if you two continue from the technical perspective. So Bob has all of his questions answered, and then me and Bob, and maybe I rejoin later on from a like project side.
I don't know. Like now, I think with what Camille has described here and the 4 points, I think we have a place to start. Like as I mentioned in the beginning of this call before Camille joined, I think the outcome of the issue 2733 in our tracker should be we have a blueprint for observability. How are we going to what are we going to measure and how are we going to do that? And I think with the 4 things that Camille pointed out now, the 2 routing services and the primary cell custom service and the secondary cells, we kind of know what we need to observe. And I can come up with a suggestion, write a blueprint on how we could do that and discuss with the rest of the observability team. Yeah, let them punch holes in it and discuss with Camille and like break it down so we get it better. But I think I can come up with suggestions for that. Then for the readiness review, we already know now that we're going to have at least 4 of them, these 4 components that Camille discussed. And the questions are going to come up in relation to each components, because now every time we've talked within scalability, we come up with a bunch of questions that span the entire cells project.
And now it will be much more focused.
And now we're going to have 4 scopes. Like most of the questions that we asked were for we're going to deploy a secondary cell. And most of the questions that we've asked, I think Camille already has an answer to, because these people, like, you've thought about it already. We just don't know. But I think having this conversation on a readiness review where somebody can sign up, yes, good idea, no, that's not going to work, is going to be better than a bunch of documents and issues. So let's do it in a readiness review when we need it.
Okay, so then in terms of what we need to get done today, I think the readiness review side is more straightforward in terms of our tasks. It's, do the readiness review 4 times.
Who's going to write the readiness review? I don't think that.
That's why for the first example there, tenant scale will write the service. So the review becomes tenant scale, us, and whoever deploys it will write the review. And I think we follow the same thing for each of the other 4 pieces. Whoever is writing, like whoever is the primary author of the code or infrastructure or mechanism, they write it alongside us and the deployers. And we just do that 4 times. I think that the one that's a bit less clear is how much work from the observability perspective is required for each of those 4 steps. So I think if you can spend some time thinking about for each of
that's going to be in the architecture blueprint that I intend to write. That's on us, and then we'll scope out that work. But we need to have a little bit of a consensus on where we want to take that before we can say how much work it's going to be.
No, that's fine. And we've got next week for the how much. Like this today is just this is the rough list. So I think the list is taking shape, which is great.
Yes, I can write the actual better list for the observability part this afternoon. That should be roughly that.
Okay, so I think what the question that came up here, and I made the assumption, is that delivery is helping us deploy something like the HTTP routing stuff. So I think that we can list as an open question on our list of things that we produce.
And then in terms of the readiness reviews, how soon can we start deploying things, Camille? Like, could we already deploy a separate cell that doesn't talk to the primary?
Not really. Like, we didn't start yet implementing API. We are just proof of concepting that at the moment. With Steve and Omar. Omar is out this week, but Tonk is taking over that work. You may look at the issue and talk with Steve to get some status on how things are progressing. But POC.
And Steve also knows readiness reviews, so that's going to be excellent to work together with him. Like, I've done the few with him in the past, so.
Yes,
I do need to drop, so I'm going to leave you two to it. We'll chat later. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Steve was focusing on the Cloudflare routing. So he did some proof of concept there. Like, if you have any specific questions about like how it's being deployed, how it's observed, like, he's the person to go. I asked him now to look at the SSHD to have like a good idea how we're gonna approach it. I mean, like, I think we already know how we're gonna approach it. The question is about what type of challenges and how much work we have to do.
Yeah, how much is it to get this thing to something you are confident deploying in front of all SSH connections to get that?
Yes, but I think this is also like the open question to the delivery on managing the services and how they are deploying, because honestly, my mindset is going towards that things are as, like, let's say these entry points to the GitLab cluster, they should be managed and deployed separately from regular versioning of the GitLab. So today, things like Pages or SSHD, they are deployed together, the primary cell. And I think this is also my open question, whether if we have like a service that is central, global, effectively like a GitLab SSHD, in my head, it should be basically moved away from the primary cell, be deployed externally.
That's something that I discussed with them when we reached back to the thread about SSHD that you had with Igor. I talked with the other Igor about this, and we also kind of felt like this should be a separate service that does this, but I understand it's easier to build it into the primary cell first. So is that something that you would extract out later, like you would do them?
I'm not being prescriptive on what is the best approach to gradually get to the end state. So whether keeping that in the primary cell or extracting now, it's better. I don't know. I can tell you about what is like requirement, and the requirement would be we have to go through central SSH. We cannot do man in the middle on SSH connection. So we have to have a SSH daemon that authenticates and decrypts, and then does like a routing on a tunnel, on an established tunnel. Fortunately, what we need to do is already implemented, because Geo is using asynchronous communication. It's basically converting SSH tunnel to HTTP. So it's exactly what we need. So technically, it's already there. It's more like a wiring things together. So in terms of the SSHD on the primary cell, I think the function would be, it would still go directly to the GitLab, but it would be routed over HTTPS for secondaries.
Yes, so that means GitLab shell, the daemon that we currently have, if it has a request coming in for itself, then it's going to talk straight to GitLab like it's been, and talk to the primary cell like it's been doing.
Yes,
in the past.
No work, like no behavior change. The behavior will be different for the secondary. But if we move it away from the primary cell, then it has to go the same way as any other secondaries. Which has
so router and then
slightly different performance characteristic.
Yes. But either way, yeah. So do you want me to look for somebody in delivery to talk about deploying SSHD separately? Because now that's just deployed with GitLab and it's served by the Git fleet.
I don't think that. I think we should describe these different components and like requirements.
Yeah, part of the readiness review.
And kind of how they're gonna function, and make a decision what is like the best from their point of view. I think long term things that are global should be truly global and be outside of the cell. But I'm not super prescriptive. It's just if this is part of the primary cell deployment, it's another component that is that kind of has slightly different resilience characteristic. But I'm fine. There is so many things to unfold that that it's gonna take time, like to switch those things.
Yes, and I think we can do, like we're talking now about the different routing services, and we can do multiple reviews to have an iterative approach to this. Like if we start with the SSHD in the primary cell, we just do a readiness review for that. And we can decide in that readiness review if it's okay to do as described now, like part of the regular GitLab project and deployments. And we could set a goal to separate it off in the future, or it could turn out that from the readiness review, people have concerns and they want it immediately, like we do with the Cloudflare worker, like that we also need immediately.
My perception about the need for the SSHD to become like a truly global is that the cells architecture at some point gonna have EU region, for example, and it just makes sense to have SSHD as a global service deployed in each region that we support, and use a Cloudflare to route to geo-local SSHD. Yes. And then really, I think that's the cost problem, because we may go intra-zone, cross-zone communication within GCP from SSHD.
As long as we like, if we keep it inside the project and there's only one global, but if we can deploy the new proxy.
So kind of.
No, because the proxy could need to communicate with a cell that is not in the same zone, is what you're saying.
So for example, like kind of following any cast approach for the SSHD, we have EU region, US West, US East region where we have cells. You just go to EU SSHD. So it's kind of routed internally to the cell that is in US. So this is potential thing to consider, but whether something like that should be moved outside or not, or like how, but like as soon as we start deploying cells in different regions, this is gonna be
a question.
Like a question how we should approach. Igor's suggestion was like to make a cell-specific domain for the SSH. That could work, but
then
maybe
customers need to know. But maybe it's acceptable, maybe not.
But honestly, this may not be like a good idea that, for example, it's not cell-specific, it's region-specific. For example, if you have eu.gitlab.com for the SSH connections, that you get always to this SSHD close to you in that particular region. But gitlab.com, since how it's served, it can still be served on the HTTPS. So it's not cell, maybe this is region-specific domain for the SSH, so we don't incur intrazone traffic costs. Because I think cell-specific is problematic because it makes it harder for us to balance cells and makes also SSHD to be cell-specific and makes you to have to route between cells, kind of creating like a like a mesh type of.
Igor was coming at it from a termination point. Also, we don't have to do the solution you came up with translating SSH to HTTP internally. But I think the solution of doing the translation is more transparent to users. And then if we want to advertise a different endpoint for Git SSH in certain regions, that's something we can do.
Yes, but like it's also like a low cost then, like to advertise just different regional SSHD, which actually can make sense in some cases, because in some cases it just makes sense that you have different endpoints for the residency. It's similar how we have Earth SSH today on gitlab.com, right? You just have additional endpoints that you can enter in terms of some failure. So it's not really far-fetched to have SSHD exposed in the region, but I don't think it should be so.
No, I think from what I'm sitting now, I think it makes sense to decouple the endpoints like there already are for alt SSH.
So that's like potential venue I like to explore, but it's still like pretty far-fetched. But I'm kind of wanted like to describe you where is my mindset in terms of why do SSHD routing in general. Just it kind of opens us this type of the possibilities later if we go that route.
Yeah, and if we glue it to cells, then we're kind of stuck, or we need to ask customers to change their own repositories and stuff to config. Okay. I think for now I have stuff to get started on. I'm going to document that we're going to start with readiness reviews, and we need 4 of them. Is there any you would start now already of the 4 that we discussed?
I would propose like maybe with routing. I think Steve has a lot of info. This is also pretty straightforward, and I think we can find a very minimal objective to deploy a pass-through routing as a way to approximate and just figure out like all observability. And I was kind of thinking that this is maybe even our OKR deploy pass-through routing service. I mean, pass-through worker that's gonna be replacing the routing
Deploy
service.
a Cloudflare worker that doesn't do anything, so we can measure the performance of not doing anything.
And also like the costs and things like that, and figure out. And I think this can be like our OKR objective, like to get familiar, and like even if you would do it on the staging, I think it's already very good, because it would expose us to how to deploy, how to manage,
how to monitor,
experiment, monitor, and all of these things. And this router would basically be 5 lines of the code.
Yes, and then all the rest is deploying it and monitoring it, and yeah.
So we could do like this first approach to the readiness review, and expand this readiness review with the more functions that we would be adding.
Yep.
Over time.
That's probably what you need from us first, right? The readiness review and the ID to the push to get this kind of routing service deployed. So I'm going to start there this afternoon.
I think this is my suggestion, because it doesn't require any significant development prep work, but it would also make us too exposed to the process, and make actually something meaningful rather quickly. And maybe also approve or disapprove whether Cloudflare is like a valid solution, because if it's not, we'll probably have to figure out how to do it on top of
yes, we need to step back and try something else. Cool. I'm going to summarize that in the Cells tenant scale channel and ping Rachel, and I hope that she will help us find people to write and review the readiness document and help with the deployments.
Sure, thank you.
Sounds good. And then Happy Friday. And then I'm going to start writing blueprints for the monitoring.
Thank you.
Bye bye. Thanks for the chat.